Thanks everybody for coming today. This is our webinar on where you can stop learning how to manage financial spreadsheets and start delivering value with Knime. So before we get started, just a couple of logistical things before we do introductions. If you have questions as we go, you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen here the Q&A button. So you can click that Q&A button. It's being highlighted there, and just put your questions in. We will see those, and we can respond to them via text. Some of them, if if it's a really good one that we want to hold till the end, we'll hold to the end and answer it then. We're going to be recording this webinar, so don't worry if you need to bail out early or something. It's not a problem. We will post the recording and send that out to you in a follow-up email later, so you can check it out, along with the workflows that we're going to demo for you. So anything that you see that we showed, promo codes, any of that stuff, don't worry, that will all be available. Next slide, please. Okay, so to get started, first of all, my name's Scott Fincher. I'm a data scientist with Knime on the education and evangelism team. A lot of what I do at Knime is centered on teaching people how to use our software better. And also with me today is Paras Gupta, who is CEO and founder of Day 5 Analytics. He's going to be talking to you quite a bit about making this transition from a finance perspective, and so I want to hand it over to him for him to talk for a little while.
Thank you, Scott, for the introduction. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Paras Gupta. As Scott mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Day 5 Analytics. A little bit about Day 5 Analytics. We're a data company that is focused on accelerating clients to their full analytical potential, and we do this by understanding the intricacies of the business, creating solid data foundations like what we're trying to do here today, and helping to deploy custom solutions. Our services involve data engineering and robotic process automation, business intelligence, advanced analytics, and training. So a little bit about myself and my background. I've got about over a decade of experience in finance environments in multiple companies across 3 different continents. This is where I got a lot of my experience with finance and all the many different tools that finance people use. So I've worked with Excel, lots of different Microsoft BI tools, Cubes, SAP, Oracle, Essbase, this background is really important to understanding how we're talking about Knime today in a finance space. My experience spans FP&A accounting and system development as well in the finance spaces. So a lot of these terms would be familiar to many of you on the call today. I've worked in corporate reporting, done variance analysis, and on the accounting side, dealt with a lot of the routine processes that accountants work through on a daily basis. I'm still very, very good at Excel. I think most of you on the call will be, which leads to the next question: why are we talking about Knime for finance people? So I'm going to give you a little bit about the backstory about how I stumbled across Knime and how it could apply to you going forward in your roles. I actually ran across Knime while I was listening to a podcast on my way to work. The podcast talked about Knime as a tool that data scientists use, but it showed that it was a no-code environment and easy to learn. So being curious as I went and investigated what this was, and I saw a bunch of nodes that looked like this, and I was curious, but I was also a little bit intimidated because there were so many nodes to choose from. So what I did is I went online. I just did a little bit of research. I went onto the website. I found a couple of really interesting resource materials. There's a book that actually helps you convert from Excel to Knime. That's freely available. There are also hundreds of examples that help you to reverse engineer other solutions and figure out how to build those solutions yourself. So I took these solutions and I went and did a project. And now the first project I did was a little bit more complicated. It was related to text analytics. And I delivered this project in a record time. Under 2 weeks, I had a solution for my company and my client. This would not have been possible at all if I was trying to do this with Excel or just standard traditional tools that are available in the company. While I was doing this project, I came across a brilliant idea. I thought, this is not so hard to learn, and it's actually very, very well suited to finance people. Finance people and accounting people think in processes. They know their data really well. And this tool has really got no coding required, and it's easy to learn. So next thing I did is I went ahead and I trained finance people in my company. This tool really took off, and my previous company is not the only company that did this. The massive organizations across the continent that have used Knime to train business users on how to extract data value from data by themselves. So if you look at the Knime website, there's multiple success stories with companies like Siemens and Continental that have done this in their own organizations and really driven data innovation within their companies. What I saw in my personal experience was when I taught this tool to finance and accounting people, the uptake was tremendous. The adoption was amazing, and the engagement that this drove with the teams was phenomenal. So if we want to talk about finance specifically and why Knime fits, I've got a couple of pointers here, and I hope some of these resonate with the audience today. As a finance department, one of the major responsibilities is to show fiscal restraint and control. So finance is typically one of the departments that doesn't spend a lot of money because they try to set an example for the rest of the departments. There's also a high pressure to deliver timely insights, which are accurate and actionable. Coding is not a requirement of most finance and accounting people, which is important here. And there's always a need to be able to audit and transfer processes to the next generation of people as they come into the company. Knime fits the bill really well for all these examples, all these expectations here. It's got a low total cost of ownership. Being an open source platform, it is very, very easy to pick this up and roll it out at low cost. And the server version, which is the enterprise version, is also very, very reasonably priced. It has got very fast processing speed. So once a workflow is designed, Scott's going to walk you through that shortly. You just need to design something once and you can keep reusing it. It enables you to retain granularity. So your insights are not going to be restricted to aggregating them at a high level. You can always go down to the transactions and dig deep into why something happened. It's no code, as I mentioned. It's got a visual drag and drop. You will see this in a few minutes. And it's self-documenting. So when you have those audit questions at the end of the year and you want to understand how the process was built and the calculation was done, the workflow itself will demonstrate to you how that calculation came about. It's easy to transfer it as a result as well. In terms of processes, finance and accounting teams have very well-defined processes. They understand their data really well, and they know what they're trying to get out of the data. The processes can also be repetitive, which can cause a little bit of manual, repetitive, tedious work. And more recently, the CPAs, at least in Canada, have been encouraged to learn this thing called robotic process automation. So I'll talk about that in a second. But Knime has a workflow interface that will align with the way finance and accounting people think about data being transformed from one step to the next sequentially. It's to eliminate repetitive work. There's the ability to use a one-click refresh or can schedule refreshes at a specific time. So if you wanted to do nightly refreshes of dashboards and things like that, you can schedule them at night. When I talked about RPA, robotic process automation is a broader topic, but Knime can enable that piece within RPA that is the data processing. In terms of data, finance people deal with large volumes, and they also have to know more about other departments other than just the financial transactions. You have to work with the operations departments, the procurement departments, and understand their data and their systems. And so Knime fits the bill here really well because it is designed, first of all, for data science solutions, and that means large volumes. We're talking about millions and millions of rows. Being able to connect to your partner's data sets in other departments, it doesn't restrict connectivity to any other systems, and it doesn't lock in data. In terms of culture, finance teams typically work in a very high stress environment. They have this can-do attitude, and they get things done, irrespective of the technology they have available, the time, the resources. They will get it done. Many finance and accounting professionals want to get to that stage of adding value, and they don't want to be stuck in the spreadsheet repetitive process stage. They're creative at problem solving, and finance has been and is a perfect starting point for many roles in different departments across the company. So with Knime, automation is enabled. So it helps to eliminate stress from peak periods. It enables self-sufficiency once you're comfortable with the tool and trained up on it. And the time freed up from those manual processes will help people focus on the value at work, as opposed to the manual repeating tasks. It's easy to apply, and the community, I didn't mention this before, but the community is fantastic. In my perspective, what I've seen, I typically get answers to my questions from the forum in a couple of hours, which is actually better than what you might expect from some proprietary tools. And knowing Knime is transferable. So I've seen Knime being applied not just in finance, but in any other department that deals with data, whether that's operations, procurement, marketing, and so on and so forth. So just to focus a little bit more on analyst challenges within finance, you may be dealing with repetitive tasks, late night cycles, and burnout. There's a lot of churn in finance teams. With Knime, you can de-stress your month end. The time savings that I've witnessed in hundreds of projects at this point, they are 75% off the time can be saved. And that is a large amount. When we talk about de-stressing peak periods, that reduction in time during peak periods can really drive adoption and engagement. For analysts, you might be dealing with siloed data. You might be in firefighting mode a lot of the times, and you're not familiar with coding, and you're looking for business partnering opportunities. So Knime would allow you to blend data from multiple different sources and extract insights from data with a lot less work. For an Excel user, and don't get me wrong, Excel is a great tool, but sometimes when you've got multiple versions of Excel floating around and you've got documents explaining how to use the other Excel files, this can become extremely complicated to handle, and you might find yourself in what's called spreadsheet hell. So with Knime, once you've figured out your process in Excel, you can translate that. As I mentioned, there's resources to help you do that. You can translate your Excel processes into automated processes and escape that situation. Sometimes when you're dealing with large data volumes with Excel, and let's say you've got VLOOKUPs all the way down the sheet, you might see the Excel is not responding sign. And that's something you can quickly get away from with Knime. In terms of how Knime supports the management teams of companies, for executives, the major challenges and objectives are the need to be innovative to compete effectively, and how to drive efficiency so that people are doing what they're best at and not maybe relying too heavily on the IT department to get results for them. There's obviously also the cost management side of things that executives have to manage. For Knime, Knime will enable the subject matter experts, so you, the finance and accounting people, to take on responsibility for your own tasks without having to bug the IT department to give you reports, run queries for you. I mean, ultimately, the IT department does want to get to more interesting things too, more than running tickets and answering query requests. For managers in finance, you might be, as I mentioned earlier, faced with disengaged staff that are tired of doing repeating processes, that are complaining about technology, and you might be seeing high churn in your teams. The other major thing is, without giving something new to your team, you may not be able to decipher who is the high-performing innovator versus who's not. With Knime, and what I've seen in my experience, and a lot of people have told me, is that Knime has really driven engagement in their teams. It is a new tool. Finance and accounting people like to solve problems. They like to get things done. And this is the tool that's going to help them get there. So with that, I just want to hand over to Scott, who's going to walk you through Knime and just show you a little bit more about what this tool looks like. Scott.
Okay. So I guess let's go ahead. Yeah, next slide here. Thank you. So when we're talking about Knime, the software, we're really talking about one ecosystem, which is made up of two different products. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see the Knime Analytics platform. That's the free open source tool that we're going to be showing you today, where you can build workflows, load in data, do transformations on that data, do visualizations, send to other, BI tools if you need to. That can all be done with Knime Analytics platform. And then there's also the complementary Knime server. People often ask us, you're an open source software company, how do you keep the lights on? We have a commercial product called the Knime server, which allows for some additional features, things like collaborating on teams, doing deployment so that you can run your workflows using REST API in an automated fashion, using scheduling, managing the execution, and all of that stuff. So we'll show a little bit of that in the demo today, but a lot of what we're going to be showing you can be done with the Knime Analytics platform. Next slide. So when we look at these workflows, just so you have a frame of reference when we're talking about this a little bit later on, we have little colored boxes in Knime called nodes, which you see in the middle here. Each node performs an individual task. So load from a spreadsheet, do a group by aggregation, write out to a database, whatever it is, one node does one thing. And we can combine a bunch of those nodes together, as we see in this middle section here, to create what we call a workflow. So this is kind of your overall project or your task. We also have what we're calling components. I can actually take several of these nodes and collapse them down into a component to do something. So this is particularly useful if I come up with a nice way of loading data and processing it. I can collapse that into a component and share that component with other people on my team, or I can, so to speak, share it with myself and reuse it in future workflows. So if I create a really cool way of doing something, I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I can just create a component and reuse that functionality later, which is nice. So don't get distracted by all of the colored boxes on this slide. What I really want to show you here is that Knime is a tool that can cover all different stages of the data science lifecycle. Now, some of this is probably not going to be applicable to what you're doing in a finance context, right? But just so you know, things like data access, Knime is really good at blending different sources of data, whether that's flat files or databases, stuff that's local on your machine or remote. Knime does that very well, and we have a lot of nodes to enable you to do that. Even big data, which you see at the bottom. The bulk of Knime's transformation nodes, you see these are kind of a yellow color. And I should have mentioned there is a color scheme in Knime that you actually can see in this diagram, where we have orange to read data in, we have yellow to do transformations. This is where you can do your aggregations, joining data together, splitting, concatenation, all sorts of stuff. In the middle are some things which we're really not going to talk about so much, but have to do with things like building predictive models. So analysis and data mining with some of those nodes. Blue nodes for visualizations. We have lots of different visualization nodes in Knime, so you can put together a bar chart, line plot, sunburst, all sorts of things. And we'll show you some of these in the demo here in a little bit. And on the right-hand side is deployment, which can mean a lot of different things. In a finance context, it might mean, I'm building a automated report, right, that I can send to my team at the end of every month, or I'm writing out to a database, or I'm creating an interactive dashboard. We have nodes to be able to help you do those things too. Next slide. So Knime is really, what I want to emphasize here with this slide is an open tool. We're an open source company, and we want to play well together with other open source tools that are out there. So we try to do that, right? And in a finance context, the things that are going to be important to you are, how can I get a hold of my data? What data sources can I access? Certainly Excel files, right? Things like, it may be more than just a local file on your machine, right? You may need to go onto Google Drive and pull sheets from there. You may need to access things via Salesforce or SharePoint or even database tables. We have nodes that help you do that so that you don't have to write any code. You just configure the node one time, execute, pull that extract down, and start working with the data. And then on the other side, once you've actually done your transformations and put everything into place, you can use Knime's visualization tools to create visualizations and dashboards to do the things you need to do. But if you already have in place something like a Tableau license or Power BI that other folks on your team are already used to, that's great too. Again, we're an open tool. We want to play nice with other tools. So we have nodes to allow you to export to Tableau, export to Power BI, and use those tools that you're already comfortable with, just to help you automate the entire process. Next slide. One thing I want to point out here is we do have an extensive community, as Paras already mentioned, that can help you get a hold of resources to help you learn how to use Knime better. So we have something called the Hub, hub.knime.com, where you can go and access example workflows, including data. And we have several of these that we'll link to later, finance blueprints that can, they're specifically tailored for common finance tasks. You can go to the Hub, download that, start playing with it, and get an understanding of how those workflows work. And then we have the forum too, that Paras mentioned. I myself am on the forum almost every day, out there helping people with their workflows. What node should I use to do this task? Why isn't this working the way I think it should? Our community is really good at helping to answer those sorts of questions. Next slide. Okay, let me go ahead. I'm going to steal the screen just briefly from Paras. Take just a couple of minutes to show you what Knime looks like. So if you're opening Knime for the first time, and if hopefully you've had a chance to download and install Knime, but if you haven't, this is what it looks like. I'm looking at a workflow. This is exactly the same workflow I just showed on the slides, where we read this from left to right. We read in some data. We do some exploratory visualization here. In yellow, we're doing some transformation, various aggregations, grouping, and pivoting on the data. And then finally, maybe we send the data somewhere else to do some additional visualization. So how would I build something like this from scratch if I was going to start? Well, in Knime, I can just go to File, New up here, and I can create a new Knime workflow and call this, some useful name, the finance demo. Maybe not flashy, but it gets the job done. And I'm presented with this, intimidating blank canvas. So usually I would want to start here by reading in some data. And to find my data, as well as all my workflows that I've already created, I can go to the Knime Explorer, which is in the top left portion of my screen here. And it just so happens that I have some adult census data in here. Again, all my workflows and components here as well. But I have this Excel file in my Knime Explorer. I can just drag this onto the canvas. Let me make this a little bigger so everybody can see it. And Knime, I drag this on the canvas. Knime sees that that's an Excel file. So it says, okay, I know what I need to, I know which node I need to load that data. It's called the Excel reader. So it creates that for me. And I can double click on the Excel reader to actually configure it and see how things should be set up here. So I get a preview of my data here at the bottom, along with what the field types are, what's contained in those fields. If all of this looks good to me, then I can click OK and move on. Maybe I need to do a subset or a selection of my data or something. So if I click OK, then I'm going to do what's called executing this node. So I can right click on the node and click the little green arrow to execute it. You see Knime think for a second, and it changes the traffic light from yellow to green, meaning I was configured before, but now I'm executed. And I can actually look at this data by right-clicking again on the node, going down to the output table, and now here's my full data set with 168 rows in it and 15 columns. So this is a really small data set, obviously, but Knime can handle much bigger data sets as well. Now let's say that maybe I'd like to do something to this data set, like filter it. Maybe I would like to filter it so that I'm only looking at males in this data set. This is census data, and one of the features in the data set is gender. So maybe I want to do a filter, but one of the common things when you're starting out with Knime is you often know what it is you want to do, but you're not sure which node it is that does that thing. So that's why we have this workflow coach here on the left-hand side, which is going to help you find which nodes you need to use. And if I look at the workflow coach, I can go down and see, oh, there's a row filter, right? That looks like that's what I'd want to use to filter out maybe only men in my data set. So I can drag the row filter in and connect the two together, and then double click to configure this node. This node has a different configuration dialog, right? Because it's doing a different thing. And then I could start to do things like, find sex as a column to test on. I'm going to filter so that I'm only including males. Click OK and execute. And you can see that in just a couple of minutes, right? I'm bringing in new nodes, I'm applying new functions, and obviously this can get quite a bit more complicated too, right? One thing I want to point out here is the node repository. This is where all the nodes in Knime live. So you can go down here and find things like, where's my column filter, where's my row filter, where's my pivoting, and so on and so forth. This is all going to be in the node repository. If I wanted to do a pivot, for example, I probably would just type in the name of the node in the search field and drag it in. So this is not to show you so much an interesting workflow. It's to show you how you would get started and then understand what the different aspects of the interface look like. We'll get into this more detail in a minute when Paras shows you something a little more complicated and interesting. One last thing I want to point out before I hand it back over to Paras is especially useful for beginners, the description pane on the right-hand side. This is context-sensitive help. So if depending on which node I'm clicking on here, I'm getting a description of what all the configuration options are for this particular node. And if I scroll down, what the input and output ports are, everything I can expect to, need to know about this node is going to be in the description pane. So this is always going to change depending on what I've got selected. So with that, that's a really quick demo of just showing you around the interface, but I want to hand back to Paras now so he can talk to you more specifically about a use case we've built that's tailored towards finance.
Thanks, Scott. So yes, as Scott mentioned, we're going to talk about a couple of use cases that might be relevant to you, but they also really demonstrate how you can apply Knime in your finance environment. So the first one I want to talk about was a financial reporting use case where a finance team went ahead and built their own reporting and dashboarding suite using Knime as the core data transformation tool. So what happened in this case was this team was dealing with millions and millions of rows of data. And the data coming out of the financial system had a lot of codes that needed to be converted into meaningful information for reporting purposes, because ultimately those reports are used by field and operations staff that don't know what the codes mean. So when you try to deal with something like this, if you try to do this in Excel, it would probably crash very, very quickly because the volume of VLOOKUPs would be too much to handle. What this team did is they used Knime to do a lot of the data prep using from the source data, and they brought in those mapping tables, did a bunch of calculations, and then wrote out the data to a database. From the database, they layered on Power BI and deployed these Power BI dashboards via Microsoft Teams. This was super powerful because everybody is on the same page at the same time when the information is pushed out. And it retains that level of granularity that you may be challenged with doing when you have to aggregate. So just keep in mind, when you bring in actual information from your transactional system, the volume of detail is down to the transactional level, but budgets are never really done at that transaction level of detail. They're done at a higher level. And so typically what you may have to do is aggregate your information to that same level of detail. They did this also with very little IT support. Besides the infrastructure set up for the Power BI dashboards and getting that out to Microsoft Teams, there was very, very little involvement from the IT team in the design and development of this process. In the words of the director himself, rushing to meet client deadlines has become a thing of the past, and delivering increased value is the new normal. And this is the exact kind of thing you want your teams to be delivering. You want to be delivering value, not pushing spreadsheets that your end users don't understand. So how does Knime fit into this process? I just want to give you a quick visual of what this might look like. So as Scott showed, you can connect to multiple different data sources, Excel, CSVs, you might have some proprietary databases within your company. So you'd use Knime to bring all these data sources together, you blend them, you automate the collection and the ad hoc analytics within Knime. And you can do this either through a click refresh in the open source Knime platform, or with Knime Server, you can go to a scheduled or triggered process, which can run automatically at set times of the day or week or month, or they could be triggered by a multitude of factors. Once this data is all prepared and ready for dashboarding, you probably want to write it to a database. And when I say database, you want something performant like a Snowflake that can handle BI reporting really, really well. But it writes to any database. So whether you're using Amazon S3 buckets or Azure or any cloud platforms, or even just on-premises SQL databases, you can write to those too. From this database is where you want to layer on your web-based BI tools. Tableau works really, really well with the database, as does Power BI. But if you really need to, you can write directly from Knime to Tableau server and Power BI cloud service. From this database, you can also use this database as your single source of data across your company. So if you're talking about building an enterprise data warehouse, this is the type of role which Knime could play in that setup. Knime can, as I mentioned, write directly to these different sources. One thing I wanted to mention here is also the automated emails. I hear a lot of times about finance people having to chase people because work was not done on time or deliverables were not submitted. Knime can submit those emails with the reports directly to people and follow up with them once the setup has been done. So I'm just going to jump into a workflow demo, and this workflow is going to be posted on the hub. The link is down here. You will get this in your slides after the session. So just give me 1 minute while I switch screens. Okay. So this is the Knime platform that Scott just showed, and I'm just going to zoom into this particular workflow here. So what I'm seeing here, what I'm showing here is a platform designed to automate reporting. So it takes raw actual information from your financial system and transforms it and writes it out. You can write it out to Excel files. You can also write out at any point to tools like Tableau, Power BI, or a database. So with the actuals data, you have a different setup to what you might have for budgets. If I zoom into this Excel reader just for a second, what I'm doing here is I'm connecting to a single Excel file. And this could be a database or whatever you need, but I'm just showing you for the purposes of demonstration. I just picked a single month, January 2020. I told it that the table contains columns, headers in row 1, and it gives me a quick preview of what this data looks like. Now, many of you will be familiar with this type of data structure where you've got a coding string and you have to break apart the coding string and attach it to bits of information that actually make it relevant to business users. Because not everybody knows what the 001 stands for, the 3000. But when you convert that into something meaningful, the business users are going to be able to understand what's going on here. You'll also see things like the accounts, down the column over here. And your accounts might be cost accounts, revenue accounts. There might be accruals. There might be invoices being paid, whatnot. So with this actuals data, the first thing I wanted to do is split apart that coding, which I can do very easily with a cell splitter. In Excel, this would be a manual text to columns type activity. So you'd have to do that every time you got a new file. The second thing you might want to do, and I'll just show you what the output for that looks like. So you have the coding string broken out into the 4 separate spaces there. Then in Excel, you might want to rename these. If you did that in Excel, you'd have to manually go and rename each of those columns. What I can do here is just configure it to say that every new column that was broken up should be assigned a meaningful name like store ID, source ID, SKU ID. Then I want to extract when the transaction happened. This can be done in Excel. Again, a complicated formula, something that looks like this for each specific time element you want to get from that. Within Knime, you can get the year, the month, the quarter, the day of the year, the day of the month, whatnot, all in one node. So in this case, I've pulled out the month number and the month name. Now, when I look at the output of that, I've added on two more columns here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So it gives you the month number and the month name. So I've just got January at this point. I'll show you for a larger time period shortly. The next thing is how do we add these mapping tables? So this is the equivalent of doing a VLOOKUP. In this case, I want to call a SKU ID by its actual name, which is relevant to the business. But I also want to add what the price of that unit looks like. I would do this with a tool, with a node called the joiner. And the joiner will essentially replicate the VLOOKUP and give you all those columns that you need. So at the output of this join, I can now see that I've been able to add on the details of the SKU and the price and the SKU name and category. I can sort this out, and at this point, I decide what I want to do. If I want to keep the transaction level of detail, I can write out my data to a BI tool and use it there, or I can continue to perform the analysis within Knime. And this is where Knime allows you to come up with really quick insights without having to use any other tool. And Scott's going to show you sort of what the visualization looks like shortly on the Knime server. On the other hand, when you're talking about budgets, your data structure is completely different. It will typically look something like this if you're pulling it out of a template or maybe even some financial systems. Your months are across the top and your categories are down the bottom. And so your data structure is very, very different to your actuals. So what you want to do here is you want to convert the numbers to strings to numbers. You want to split certain rows. So for example, this end of report means nothing and it's got no value in my data exercise. So I drop it off. Then I want to do something which Excel cannot do. I want to unpivot this. And maybe you can do this now in Excel with Power Query and things like that, but that gets complicated very, very quickly. With my unpivoting, I can now transform that data structure to a vertical or tidy data set, whatever you want to call it, that now can match up very well with the actuals. And at that point, I can rename it and write it out. So in this case, I wrote out 2 data sets here that are actuals and budget, and I retained the level of granularity from the actuals, I didn't have to aggregate it before I wrote it out. What does that look like? Well, you can have a BI tool like this pick up those levels of detail and show what they look like. This is Tableau. What are the recommended tools that you might want to consider? But what you can see here is I built this dashboard once. I don't have to build it every month or every time I run this report. If I click on this particular store, it flexes and gives me the results, and I can drill down into the details here. So with it, for that $360, I can see where that amount came from, and I can keep drilling down as far as I want to go, because I didn't lose that level of granularity when I needed to convert to my reporting tool. So while this is great, what I really want to show you is how this can scale. So if I go back to my Knime workflow here, if you remember, I had just picked a single month. I can very, very quickly just convert this to reading multiple files in this folder. So in this folder, I have several files of different months. I have January, February, March, April, May, and June, and they all have a similar format, 2020.xlsx. So I can tell it, go into that folder and read any of the files with an XLS extension and a 2020 label. Many of you might see this happen today, where you download data dumps from your Excel, from your financial system, and store them. So right now, I've converted this, and I'm now reading 6 files. I'm reading 6 months of data, okay? So I apply that, and I run the workflow. So I built this once for 1 month, and now I'm gonna run it for 6 months. So I ran it for 6 months. It wrote out my data here. If I go back to my BI dashboard, my Tableau dashboard, and I refresh this, very quickly you will see, oops. Give me 1 second there. If I just refresh the data from here, you'll see that this now picks up 6 months of data. And there you go. We built something for 1 month, and now it can scale to as much volume as we need it to go to. So going back to the slides here, I'm just going to hand it over to Scott to show you what this might look like on the Knime server itself.
Okay, so I'm going to grab the screen right quick. So if we were to deploy this workflow that Paras showed you to a Knime server and just add a couple of little features to it, then we have the ability to run the workflow via what's called the web portal. So this is part of our commercial software package, where you can run these workflows, particularly useful for a business user or a finance user, for example, who doesn't know anything about Knime and maybe doesn't even have it installed. They can still run the workflows that you've built for them by accessing the web portal view here, and then just clicking on what they need, and then they can get some interactive, dashboards available. And I'll show you how that works right now. So I'm logged into my Knime server, and I have a couple of different workflows called the finance reporting variance analysis. I'm going to look at version number 6 here. Click on this, and I see, this gives me a little description up here at the top of what this workflow actually does. And then I have a big yellow run button, right? I can also have the option to notify me when the workflow is completed. And in case this is a workflow that's more about automation instead of dashboarding, I could put my email address again in here, and then it's going to populate it and send me a little note when it's done. But what I'm going to do now is just click the run button. And again, what this is doing is it's firing up Paras's workflow that you just saw, and it's going to prompt me for some things. So it's going to say, do I want to load just a single month's worth of data, or do I want to load multiple? So if I select a single here and click next on the bottom, then I actually get offered, well, which one do you want to check, right? So I can pick May, March, February, whatever it is. In this case, actually, I think I would like to run all of them. So I can click back, then click multiple, and go to next. And because that takes a little bit of time to load several of these different spreadsheets, let me just pull up a different tab here. So once the spreadsheets are loaded, then I have the ability to select, well, turns out there's 4 different stores in this data set we've created. Do I want to include all of them? By default, I can. Or maybe, I don't care about these 2. I can move them over and look at just the ones that I'm concerned about. But I have the ability here to select which stores I'm interested in. Then I can click next. And once I do that, here's some, here's a dashboard that I built. This is all done using Knime nodes in a workflow that's running behind the scenes. So I can see things like, how my revenue or my costs or my budget amount is changing over time. I can introduce little filter sliders here so that if I don't want to look at each month, maybe I'm just concerned about, months 2 through 4, right? I can change that on the fly to limit what I'm looking at. I could also, instead, if I want to plot something other than the revenue, I can go up here and change this on the fly to change the fields. Maybe I'd rather look at cost instead. I can do that. And then it should be refreshing, and it didn't. So we have run into the demo bug. But you get the idea, right? I can change this stuff on the fly if I don't run into a bug. There's other stuff down here as well. So I have a bar chart that goes along with the line plot. Things like, comparing the revenue versus the budget per store, right? I can mouse over and see immediately what those are at any particular given point. And then I also have my revenue and budgets for different SKUs that are in this data set. And for these two, this bar chart is actually connected to this little tabular view over here, such that if I want to look at just, the burgers in my data set, right, I can click on the burger portion of the bar chart, and then it highlights for me in the table anything that's associated with the burger in the tabular view, or vice versa, right? I could uncheck those things and have it select whatever it is I want. So this is a fairly simple example in that it's just like a single line plot and a few bar charts in a table, but these can be as complicated or as simple as you need it to be. And then again, the advantage here, right, is I've created all this using a Knime workflow. I put it up on the Knime server, and someone who doesn't even have Knime installed at all or understand anything about workflows can still interact with the data set and make some decisions about what it is that they need to do with their data that's particular to them. So with that, I'll hand it back to Paras, and he can talk about the next use case.
Thanks, Scott. And just to comment on the cost thing, their cost was not actually written out in that data set. That's why it didn't show up on the workflow. And another thing I wanted to point out is that when you're talking about reporting in a finance case, you want to be able to schedule this so you don't have to go in there and click a button. So the Knime server allows you to schedule that data collection and write that report as needed without having to manually do that work. Okay, so I'm going to jump into another use case here. And this case is talking about centralizing accounting processes using Knime. So another one of our clients went ahead and worked through with multiple different teams within the finance department around processes that they were each individually doing. Now, these processes were fairly consistent, not 100% the same. They had their different business rules that needed to be applied. But this team was able to go ahead and consolidate those different types of analysis into one and allow for the different business rules to be applied for the different teams. They centralized cost accruals and some routine tasks by doing this. And they had about 20 different teams that they centralized this work across. What this really resulted in for them as a department was, first of all, when they went in there and reviewed these Excel processes, they discovered a whole bunch of hidden efficiencies that were not visible before. They were also able to redistribute this work to off-peak, because with Knime, you can run it at the click of a button at any point in the month. This allowed senior members to focus on more value-added tasks. And in terms of time savings as a team, they were able to save 80% of their time, essentially saving 5 weeks of the year and recovering that time to do other stuff. The big point I wanted to make here is that this team was able to scale their business without a proportional increase in cost. As they got more clients, as they needed more teams to support those clients, they could continue to run these processes and scale those at cost accruals, whether they had 5 clients or 10 or 15 or 30 or 100. And this is the type of things many finance departments might be looking for today. How do you grow without that proportional increase in cost? So our clients get to these positions today once they're comfortable with Knime, and Day 5 Analytics offers a Knime training and support plan. Everybody learns differently, and we offer in-person coaching now delivered virtually during the time of COVID. But this is how you may be able to bring groundbreaking innovations to your daily work in finance with no coding required. We've got feedback that our training is cost effective and it's self-sustaining, and it is an engagement driver. Once you are able to get off the ground with a couple of these workflows, the sky's the limit. It's not just a matter of the 1 or 2 use cases you can design. Our students go ahead and design 10, 15, 20 different workflows and automate processes on an ongoing basis. I used to be an Excel whiz 5 years ago before I discovered Knime, and today I basically just use Excel just to review a couple of numbers, but I don't need to use Excel for anything else. Our Knime training program is designed for finance and accounting challenges based on benchmarks that we've seen with our teams that have been trained. There's less than a 6-month payback in the cost. A project is delivered as a result of students participating in the training, so there's actually an immediate value added back to the company. They get dedicated coaching with a Knime expert from our team. And if you're a CPA, you can collect CPA, CPD hours for this. And finally, this is quite important. If you do end up spending training dollars with us and you hire us for consulting work after that, there's consulting credits that will help offset that cost. So with that, I just wanted to summarize quickly the business benefits of Knime. Automation, auditability, continuity, and scale. I think we saw this with the types of visual workflows that you saw today, and how I demonstrated the scale of that reporting that could be done. It's engaging and it drives data processing self-sufficiency. So it's business friendly. You don't need to be a coder to use the tool. It's got a drag and drop interface, which is easy to understand, especially if you are familiar with logical sequential processes with data. The time to value is dramatically reduced using Knime. There's no need to worry about learning SQL and all these other coding languages and Python and whatnot, when it can all be done within Knime. And a data savvy business person, I think these words here really reflect finance and accounting people. They're data savvy, but they are business people at the end of the day. They can manage a process end to end with embedding the domain knowledge that they have. It's quick integration. It doesn't matter if you're a Microsoft shop or you use Google or whatever systems you use, it works with everything because of its open source nature. Speaking about the open source nature, it's got a very low total cost of ownership when you compare it to some of its competitors out there in the market. Some competitors which offer the same sort of functionality are charging thousands of dollars a year, while this platform is absolutely free, open source, containing enormous functionality. A lot of times you hear about companies proclaiming to drive data analytics democratization, but if you consider the costs that they may involve, you are limited to how much democratization that is going to lead to. With Knime, you can address multiple program problems in a single package. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not only for finance, but other departments within your company can start to benefit from this too. I've seen operations and procurement teams who do a lot of reporting benefit from Knime automation just because they're having to pull data from multiple different places, which are arranged in different formats, and they need to tie them all together. It does data extraction, preparation, reporting, data science. Obviously, that's the core of the tool. So when you are ready to get to that machine learning and data science stage, Knime is already there. It's able to scale up to do that. It also does very, very interesting things like geospatial analytics, which you typically pay for larger tools to do this. Guided analytics, which is what Scott showed you, and the deployment as well. A lot of times people will design tools, but they're not able to deploy them because they require additional investment and additional tools to deploy. There are extensive support resources. As I mentioned, the community is very, very active in the forums. I typically get answers to my questions within a couple of hours. There's lots of training, events, and webinars that happen. And Knime is really at the cutting edge of what's coming out. So whether it's deep learning or applying Knime to image processing, it's getting into all of these things, which are sort of where the future of data and analytics is going.
Yes, there we go. The fall summit is coming up. It is imminent. In fact, it is next week. So if you are interested in learning more about Knime, we have a full week of activities, data science in action, right? So the first 2 days of the summit are training courses, full day-long training courses starting at level 1 all the way through specialized stuff in level 4. And then we have days on Wednesday and Thursday where our developers will come out and talk to you about some of the new cool features we're working on in the software. And then we'll have also on the fourth day, some of our customers and users will come and discuss some of their specific use cases and talk about the workflows they've built and the ways that Knime is helping drive success in their companies. And we also, even on the fifth day, we have a day of workshops for some additional topics. So this is something that's interesting to you. Please check the link there. Come see us. There's still time to register. We'd love to have you. And with that, let's see. Yeah, let's do some Q&A here. So we've already had some good questions come in. Thanks for those of you who are submitting. And before we start with answering some of these, we're not going to have time to get to all of them. But what we will do is we will collect all of the questions that are asked. And if your question doesn't get answered, when we send out the link to this session that'll have the recording in it, it'll also have a link to the forum thread where in the next coming days, we'll make sure that we get answers to all the questions that have been posed. So you can check that forum thread to see what's going on, even if we don't have a chance to talk about your stuff live in the next 10 minutes. So one of the things that I wanted to answer, we got a question. Where did it go? I'm trying to scroll up here. Do any of the Knime extensions have restrictive licenses, meaning that they are not open source? Are any not free? There are a few. There are very few relative to the number of extensions that are out there. For the vast majority of the cases, if you want to download a Knime extension to do something like, I don't know, image processing or text analytics or some of the geospatial stuff, that's going to be free, and it's just a matter of doing a one-time install. There are a few connectors that have licenses that our partners have developed and that they require a license for. But if that's the case on the Knime Hub, it should mention that. But for the most part, you don't need to pay for anything as far as extensions go. Let's see. Paras, there was a question here about Snowflake. You want to take that one?
Yes, the question was, does Knime work well with Snowflake, and does it require Knime server? Yes, absolutely. Knime Analytics Platform works really well with Snowflake. I personally used it. I'm able to push millions and millions of rows to Snowflake, which accepts it in 10 seconds or less. It's a batch load process. Knime connects directly to it. And then also the benefit of working with Knime in collaboration with Snowflake is Knime has a bunch of database nodes for those of you that are working from, familiar with databases, which allow you to orchestrate a lot of the transformations within a performant database like Snowflake. So no, we do not need Knime server for that, but obviously Knime server, if you're talking about it on a reporting basis, you might want to use that to help schedule your transformations within Snowflake. I'm going to take another question there, Scott. Sure. There's a question about, are there nodes like XNPV? I believe there are some nodes. It might not be particularly NPV nodes, but in any case, many of these processes are sequentially designed. So if you're talking about net present value, there's a process for how that's designed in Excel. That can be designed as a component by stitching together multiple nodes to create that component. And once that component is created, it essentially will act like your Excel XNPV node. And you could share that with other people in your company, and they could all use that to continue to design their analysis.
There's another question here about auditability. It's a long question, so I won't read it out, but it's how do you show proof in terms of data integrity with respect to compliance frameworks? And so what I wanted to mention here was we have a new feature that's been introduced in the latest version of Knime version 4.2. That is the workflow summary. So what you can do now when you've built a workflow is you can actually just go to File Export within Knime and generate either a JSON or XML summary of the workflow. And what you can then do is use that workflow summary to look at the metadata. So which nodes are connected, what are the parent nodes, what are the child nodes, what data am I loading in, what is the status of the nodes that have been executed, all sorts of different things about the workflow that you would need to know to keep, a detailed log basically for compliance purposes. So that's a new feature that we've introduced. And in fact, because the way we do things with Knime is to build workflows, we have workflows that parse that workflow summary data for you. Those have been posted on the hub. And I can maybe in a second try and put a link to one of those into the chat so you can go explore a little bit more. But that's a feature that we've been asked a lot about lately. And so we've brought in this workflow summary, and we're going to continue to expand on that. So I know that's of particular interest for you finance folks. So I want to make sure that you know about that. Horace, you had one marked here about geospatial analytics.
Yes, there's a question about, can you explain a little bit more about geospatial analytics? Yes, so Knime has integrations with OpenStreetMaps and a bunch of other tools which allow you to do things like, create polygons around points or find out which points are located within certain polygons. So if you're ever thinking about doing things like what does a market penetration look like, Knime can be the tool that allows you to do things like that. There's also a bunch of other features in there that allow you to keep all the data together. So you're not having to separate out the geospatial information from the data that's attached to it. So very powerful. I've used it personally for creating heat maps within, I believe Knime has a choropleth map in it, but you can also push that data out to tools like Tableau, which can help you visualize it and distribute that type of information if that's your BI platform of choice.
There was one question I had marked here about, and Parsi, you may want to chime in here on this one too, but there's one about how do you face issues with IT teams not allowing finance teams to install Knime because it is open source? What arguments can we use to get Knime installed on user computers? I mean, I guess the first thing that I would say there is to frame the question this way. I think because Knime is open source, it's actually an advantage. Open source doesn't mean that everybody can, see your data and that everything's wide open to the world. I mean, there's encryption functionality in Knime using existing well-known libraries. So if there's a perception in your organization that open source means that there's a laxness about data security, that's certainly not true. And in fact, because Knime is open source and because you can see the code and, people can go out on, GitHub and see exactly what we're doing, we're an open book. There's not any secrets about how we approach that stuff. It's not a black box. You're not having to trust us when we say it's secure. You can look at the code yourself and verify that that's the case. So I guess I would, if you have to go make that argument to your IT department, that's how I would frame it, is to say that open source really is an advantage in that sense. And I don't know, Paris, if that's something you've run into or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see this a lot of times. There is a misconception about the open source terminology, but open source aside, once you've explained that to them, and IT people understand what the difference is between open source and proprietary, there's a lot of other things that are involved here, right? So if we look at the use cases that I just showed you, we're talking about the value that your team is going to be able to deliver by just having access to a free tool. And if you put that into terms of what does that mean for how quickly you're going to get your month end done? What does that mean for reduction in churn in your company because your people are now engaged in doing value add analysis? What does that mean for IT themselves in terms of reduced volume of data pulling and querying and the types of things that many IT people don't really want to do today? If IT people actually want to do more of this cutting edge stuff, the machine learning, the data science, the cloud computing, many people don't want to sit there and do pulling of data for you. So if they can allow you to self-service by providing access to a free tool like this, that is actually in their own best interest. And if you wanted to explain a couple of the use cases, there's some solid use cases up on the Knime website. If you go to the section that is titled use cases, you'll see a couple by like the two I just showed you, which are linked here, but also major companies like Siemens and Continental, which have really driven data democratization across the corporations by installing Knime on computers. So it's just a matter of getting over that hurdle, explaining the security things. There's a whole blog post around Knime and security that should be sufficient to help IT get over that concern. But if not, you can always reach out to us at Knime, and we'd be happy to help jump on a call and explain these to them.
And I think let's do one more. Again, if we didn't get your question live in the QA, no worries. You'll see the link in your email that will go to the forum post where we'll answer these over the course of the next few days. A question here about the courses that overlap in the summit. Because they overlap, how can I do them all? Don't worry about that. I would say just start at whatever level you're on. If you're going to take a Knime course, L1, L2, wherever you're at, start there. And then we teach the courses throughout the year. So it's not just offered at the summit, but we also offer these online, usually 3 or 4 times throughout the year. So we cycle through, you'll have a chance to take them. And of course, don't forget about Pars's course that's specialized for finance folks as well. So you have that opportunity. Don't worry about it if things overlap at the summit. Okay, I think we're at the top of the hour, so we need to wrap it up. Just want to thank everybody for coming out, and thanks, Paras, for demonstrating the use cases for us and showing us how Knime can be valuable in this finance context. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a
All
nice
right.
day.
Yeah, see you soon, hopefully at the Knime Summit next week. Take care, everybody.